This is Misha, and continuing our coverage of the classic Walthers, we have probably the quintessential classic Walther. This is the Police Pistol, or PP. Well, the PP was a further development of the Model 4 and Model 8, and was released in 1929. Its claim to fame, it was the first commercially available double single action gun. Has a direct blowback, doesn't use a locked breech. Originally it was chambered for 7.65 .32 caliber. Later these would be in 9mm Kerrs. It's got a single double action trigger. Has a slide mounted decocker, which is also a safety. This has a 6.7 inch overall length with about a 3.8 or 3.9 inch barrel, so reasonably long for a .32 caliber gun. It holds 8 rounds in a detachable magazine. It has a Browning style push button mag release. Yeah, these went into production in the 30s. They were mostly used by German police, but the military did buy quite a few as well. This one here was actually made by Interarms in the 1960s in Germany. It's an import. I shouldn't say it was made by Interarms, but they imported it. It was made in West Germany. But same as a wartime model, except for a few modernizations we'll get into in just a minute. But yeah, pretty much the PP design remained unchanged until production ended. Well, never really has. It ended in the 80s. It's swapped around manufacturers multiple times. But this is a very simple, direct type gun, very modern. I mean, it looks modern for today's standards, so for the 1930s it was incredibly modern. But quite a few of these were used by the Nazi German regime. Here's one over here. This is an example from 1945. Has wood grips as opposed to bakelite or plastic. This is what they went to. Has parkerized or phosphated small parts, which is something Walther started doing with their P38s towards the end of the war as well. The magazine is phosphated on this. There's a few simplifications to the frame, but otherwise pretty well unchanged. Even these late war guns are still high quality, still have a functional safety. You know, they cut some corners, but nothing major. Well, the Walther factory would continue making the PP, at least the original factory in Zell-Melles, up until 1945. And quite a few were used by German police during the war, with a goodly number used by the military as well. But in 1931, the more famous little brother of the PP, the PPK, was released. Now the PPK is a compact version. It has a 3.1 inch barrel. It is about 6.1 inches overall length. It's a little bit lighter at 21 ounces versus 23 for the full size. Now this one here was actually made in 1943 during the war, and it actually has the dural frame, which was an aluminum alloy mix they used. They tried using it with both the PP, PPK, and P38. Well, it was not successful with the P38, but they did make quite a few with the PP and PPK. So this actually is even a little bit lighter. I'm going to say, should have thrown it on my scale, probably about 16 to 17 ounces. It's maybe 18 at the most, quite light. Another change that the PPK had is, aside from being shorter, it has a wraparound grip, which has the mainspring underneath it. Made production a little faster and easier. And it uses a 7-round magazine for .32 caliber, or 6-round for 380 9mm Kerrs. So it's a little bit shorter in the grip. Has a fixed lanyard ring at the base here. Yeah, these would also be in production until the end of the war in 1945. The PPK. I'm not going into a huge amount of detail with these because there's several excellent websites out there covering them, but I just wanted to kind of show them off. Well, in 45, the Walther factory at Zella-Mehlis was overrun. Eventually, it would just be bulldozed by the Russians. Fritz Walther, the owner, escaped to the west, to the Allied-occupied zone of Germany. He started manufacturing again in 1947, making adding machines. And in 1950, he would open a factory in Ulm, Germany, which is still in operation today. But at that time, firearms companies weren't allowed to produce guns in Germany. So what they did is Walther partnered and licensed with a company in France called Manurhin to manufacture the PP, PPK, and later the P1 pistol for them in France. In 1952, the PP went into production, and in 1953, the PPK went into production at Manurhin. This is a 50s era PPK made in France under license for Walther, and these were distributed in the USA by Inter Arms in the mid to late 50s. And if you looked at our P38 P1 video, you'll know in 55 the Allies lifted the ban on manufacturing guns in West Germany. In 1957, Walther started back up making the P38 P1, but they were very busy making the P38 P1, so they didn't really have leftover production capacity to continue the PP and PPK. So Manurhin would keep making them. In the 60s, it's an interesting situation. You'll start to see guns that are marked made in West Germany, but actually the parts, the forgings for the slide and the frame were made in France by Manurhin, and then they were sent over to West Germany for final fitting, finishing, and proof testing. Therefore, under European law, they were made in Germany, even though the initial components were made in France. So there's kind of a partnership there. Well, this would last for a little while, but in 1968, there'd be another wrench thrown in the works. The U.S. would pass firearms legislation controlling the importation of guns. They were trying to block so-called Saturday night specials, and the Walther PPK missed it by 1 point. It wasn't quite there. It was too small, too light, yada yada. The PP was still okay for import, but in 1968 the PPK was banned from further import into the United States. So what Walther did in 1969, they developed the PPK-S. And what this is, we've got a PPK slide and barrel, short barrel and slide, on top of a PP full-length grip. If you notice, it has the two-piece grip panels, not the wraparound, and it has the full-sized 8-round mag. So what this did, it gave the PPK-S enough points to be importable again into the United States. So these will start to be brought over in 1969 and 1970. This one here is actually West German, I should say, police surplus. It's an early production made in 69. So the West Germans did use, even though the PPK-S was kind of something made to comply with laws, in a weird way, Walther kind of found a happy medium between the PP and PPK. The PPK-S has a larger grip, which most people found comfortable. It has an extra shot in the mag, which is nice. So in a way, they found that the PPK-S has become very popular. These also have ribbed triggers, which is kind of interesting, what Walther would consider target triggers. Well, to kind of fast forward a little bit, we have Manurhin in Germany producing these under two different names. In 1979, Walther would contract with Ranger in America to produce a PP and PPK for Inter Arms here in the USA. That was to get around the 68 and also just to cut costs. So beginning in the early 80s, Inter Arms would have guns made under license by Ranger under Walther license for distribution in the USA. And interestingly, whereas all the European guns are either blued or perhaps nickeled, if you see a stainless steel PP or PPK, it was made in the USA by Ranger. Also in the early 80s, relations between Walther and Manurhin fell apart. Manurhin would actually continue to make guns until 1986, but they kind of lost the licensing, so it gets convoluted. There's some very interesting stories out there about that. In 2002, Smith & Wesson would take over production from Inner Arms as they went out of business. And today, Walther USA of Fort Smith, Arkansas is actually starting to manufacture the PPK again in the U.S. Also, Walther Germany is manufacturing a 22 caliber version of the PPKS in Germany. So it kind of goes on and on. For more info, check out the blog article. I don't want to get too boring. But for our final PP, we have the PP Super. And this is something that is quite different. What the PP Super is, it's chambered for a 9x18 police cartridge. And what they were trying to do in the early 70s, it was decided that West German police needed a more powerful gun. 32 caliber, 380 caliber would no longer cut the mustard, so they needed something stronger, and there was kind of a back and forth. Some people wanted to go by the 9x19 parabellum round, which ultimately did win out, and some wanted to do the 9x18. And the whole reason the 9x18 came about, it was the most powerful loading you could get in a direct blowback type gun. And the reason they wanted to do a direct blowback, you had a fixed barrel, so you had inherently more accuracy, but they were much cheaper to produce, and because it was just a simple spring operating the action, they were perceived as more reliable. They could also be made smaller for police use. But of course the flip side is 9x19 parabellum was more universal, more powerful, so on and so forth. So there was merits to both. In 1973, Walther released the PP Super. Now the 9x18 police cartridge was actually kind of a pickup from a World War II round known as 9x18 Ultra, which is actually a cartridge that the Luftwaffe was experimenting with in the 1940s for much the same reason. They wanted a more powerful, simple, direct blowback gun because during the war the Luftwaffe was issuing little blowback 32s for the most part, so they wanted something more powerful. Incidentally, the Soviets also learned of this research, and that's where 9x18 Makarov came from. But 9x18 police and 9x18 Makarov are not at all interchangeable because they actually have different bore diameters. So you can't use one and the other, unfortunately. So yeah, this came out in '73. It's a scaled up PP. We've got a 3.6 inch barrel. Overall length is right at about, should have looked it up before getting on here, I apologize. Probably right at about 7 inches, 7.1 I think. So a little bit bigger than the full size PP. It might be 6.9, but anyway, you get the idea. It is heavier though because it's a thicker gun. This weighs about 27, 28 ounces. So it's quite a bit heavier than the full size PP. We have this large dot front sight. We have very large windage adjustable rear sights, so more advanced sights. Still have a typical double single action trigger. Still have the PPK or PP style decocker safety. Actually, I should back up. When I say safety, I'm incorrect on this one. It's a decocker only. As you see, it's spring loaded back up. You'll see this later in the P4 and the P38K. But yeah. Also, what you'll see later in the P4 is a firing pin safety system. This has a system whereby, unless the trigger is fully pulled for the entire duration of the hammer going forward, so you pull it back, let the trigger, and then let off, it actually doesn't hit the firing pin. It actually falls into a hole in the hammer. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but there's a small hole in there that lets the firing pin pass through safely. And this would be used later on the P4, P5, and even up through the P88. So a very effective firing pin system, very reliable as it turns out. Finally, unlike the PP, this has a slide release, whereas your PP and PPK do not. Same Browning style mag release here. Feeds from a 7-round box mag. Interestingly, it uses wraparound grips, much like that of the PPK. Yeah, these were produced for a brief time. 1973 they came out. By 1975, West Germany had selected 9x19 Parabellum, so it was clear this was on the way out. Only about 2,000 of these were sold to West German police, and Walther would end production by 1979. No one knows exact production numbers, but they're very low. 4 or 5,000, maybe 6, not many at all. They would do a version in 380 for the export market, but all of the police issue guns were in 9x18 Ultra. Yeah, the PP Super. It didn't really do a lot. It was kind of a dead end, but its safety system and decocker only lever would be carried over to later Walther designs. So for that alone, it's worth something, and it also is kind of the last in the PP lineage. The PP and PPK and PPKS are still in production today, but they're pretty much unchanged with a few safety adaptations that have been done. This was the last wholly new design in the series. But yeah, we thought we'd just share. For more, check out the blog article, and there's several excellent websites as well. So if you have any questions, please post them below. As always, this is Misha Co, and thanks for tuning in.